Incomeware, and the goal is to kind of give you some direction on how you might go about monetizing your projects. I really love this quote. This is probably summary of like what I view our career as a software developer as, and it's if you build a car, you can only sell it once. If you paint a fence, you only get paid for the one time you paint it. If you create a piece of software that's essentially free to reproduce, you can keep getting paid over and over and over and over and over again. I slightly paraphrase that, but it's by Marcus Persson. So who am I? Probably is a really good question if you're curious, like why is this guy talking to me about how to make money off software? So I run Cypert.com. I make a little bit of money off of that. We'll talk about that as well. It's tech blogging, software engineering for the most part. Some soft skills; those have been of interest of late. I run Pyre Studios. It's a part-time software development consultancy. It's also an umbrella for some of the other projects that you might hear about. The one that my cursor's over is Luna Journal. So this is a application, a mobile app and web app built in Flutter. And it's the goal is to help track my dog's seizures, and we'll talk more about that later. And then this is a picture of me. It's a full body shot, since you don't get that from our Zoom cameras, unfortunately, and my wonderful fiance, Catherine. Okay, so let's just jump straight into it. So you have income opportunities, and there's quite a few, but there's four main areas. So the first one is ads. Everyone is completely familiar with ads at this point. You see them all over the place. You probably have tools to block them, especially in your web browser or other areas. They're kind of what you see is what you get. A lot of people, well, we can talk more about it, but a lot of people have opinions on ads. So I guess that's something to be aware of. Maybe a little less obvious is the idea of a subscription service. This is often called a software as a service, or SaaS. And what a software as a service is you pay like a monthly fee for some software to provide you with something. Netflix is a software as a service. There are lots of others, but Netflix is like one that hopefully everyone's mostly familiar with. Another income opportunity would be in-app purchases. These are way more common on mobile than anything else, but that's not to say you can only do them on mobile. And this is like the little the prompt to purchase something inside of an application on a user's device. And then there's one that's maybe a little still common in business or enterprise cases, but not so common for consumer cases, which is pay-to-use software or licensed software. So a little bit about ads. They are extremely easy to set up. If you set up Google Ads, it's usually just filling out a form with some tax information so they can report your earnings to the IRS, and then you are generate like Google Ads will generate a script for you, and you just add that script to your web page. There's a couple other ad platforms, and we'll talk about those in a minute, but for the most part, they're all really easy to set up. Ads allow you to monetize your projects that users wouldn't pay for. This is really relevant. So I mentioned bradcypert.com. No one is going to pay to read articles on bradcypert.com. But with ads, I can take a little tiny bit of income from every 100 or so users that end up on bradcypert.com to read an article about Flutter or to read an article about how to monetize your projects. And then ads have a really low maintenance cost. With all of the ads that have built into software over the years, I don't think I've ever had to maintain them. I think I just you add that script and you're good to go, or you add like the AdMob SDK and you're good to go. So ad networks are like the body that determines which ads get shown on your website or your app or your desktop application, whatever you're building. So Google Ads is probably the most popular one, especially for the web. It's what I use on bradcypert.com. There's no requirements to sign up for Google Ads. Some competitors to Google Ads require you to have 10,000 or 100,000 monthly unique visitors or something like that. Google Ads does not, which is great if you're just starting out. Google AdMob. So about 7 years ago, 6 years ago, Google acquired a company called AdMob that did advertisements for mobile, AD for ads, MOB for mobile, and they integrated it into their ads offering. So if you are doing mobile ads, you are probably going to use Google AdMob, whether you're on iOS or Android. There are other options out there. This is probably the easiest to set up and the most common that I've seen. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one of my favorite ones, actually. So there's a company called Carbon that does ads that are, you can only apply for like their ad code on developer and design focused applications or websites or whatever you're building. So it's really targeted ads, and they're ads for developers and designers. And usually that means that they're really relevant. So if I'm on a developer blog and I get an ad for, maybe I'm reading a blog post about setting up Java servers, and the ad that I might see is for the JBoss server setup guide, and it's some ebook that like might be relevant to what I'm looking at, which is really great. Those niche audiences or the niche audience networks have a lot of really nice benefits, but they usually have a higher barrier to entry as well. One of the downsides with Google Ads or Google AdMob is it's actually kind of hard to control which ads do display. There are some filters, like you can choose to allow adult content or drug-related content or political content, gang content, things like that. But outside of those filters, you don't have a lot of control. So it can be pretty weird. You'll occasionally pull up like a site, and you'll see some pretty strange Google ads based off of things that don't really fit in the website. So pros and cons to each of those. Subscription services are probably the area that's the most interest of mine at the moment, at least. So subscription services are great. We talked about them. They're kind of like Netflix. You pay a monthly fee and you get something, whether that's thousands of movies to watch or TV shows, or whether that's some photo editing app like Adobe Creative Cloud or whatever. There are a lot of different subscription services. So the benefit, recurring income, you get paid every month, which is always nice. One of the downsides is that there's a lot of overhead that comes with managing subscriptions. People want to be able to cancel their subscriptions when they no longer want to use the product. That totally makes sense, but you have to allow them to have a way to cancel their subscriptions. And then generally, there's a cut that goes out to the platform, whoever you run your subscription services through. So there are several different subscription platforms. Actually, there are way more than several. There are hundreds, and these are some of the ones that I've used and personal favorites. Stripe is fantastic. It's kind of, maybe I would argue that it's kind of steep. If your software ever really takes off, you can probably negotiate custom rates with them to address some of this. But for every dollar, Stripe would take, well, for every transaction, Stripe would take 2.9% and a flat 30-cent fee. This means that if people are paying, 50 cents, you're barely making anything off of your monthly subscription. But if people are paying $100, you're giving Stripe $2.90 plus 30 cents, so what, $3.20, and you get $96.80 back. ChargeBee is another company. They're kind of a competitor to Stripe. They take the approach where Stripe can actually be, Stripe offers so many tools, and they're all financial related or business related, I guess I should say. And it can be overwhelming. ChargeBee is trying to make subscriptions as simple as possible. They have a really generous free tier, and then they have a paid tier that starts at $250 a month. If you hit that paid tier, you're making more than $250 a month, so like you're ideally not losing any money on this. But these two are kind of competitors. Revenuecat, which is actually what I use with Luna Journal, is a platform that makes in-app purchases easier, and whether that's a flat in-app purchase or in-app subscriptions. And then also provides like a backend as a service that you can query user subscription states on to figure out, are people still subscribed, and get all sorts of analytics and things like that. The costs, they actually really recently changed this model for how they price their customers. And it's now cost scales by transactions, and then there's a paid tier that starts at $8 a month. There's also a free tier. That's what I'm currently using, and it's working out great. Also, if you want to be more to the metal, I guess, you have Apple and Google Play as options as well. So if you're doing in-app purchases or in-app subscriptions, you can do them directly through the App Store on Apple or Google Play. They normally take 30%. Both of these platforms just released a 15% offering for developers that haven't made their first, I think it's $1 million off of the Play Store yet, or the App Store. So as long as your revenue is under $1 million, you can get a 15% cut instead of a 30% cut, which is pretty great. I wouldn't quote me on those numbers. I don't know. I haven't made more than $1 million yet, or whatever the bracket is. So I am in the 15%, and probably will be for a long time. So in-app purchases are another option. I mentioned these a little bit. They're conventionally only accepted in mobile apps, but there's maybe a couple exceptions to that. If you are into video games at all, you've probably seen more and more like cosmetics and other types of things that you can purchase inside of an application that are relevant to that application. You can play the game without it, but you can also buy these extra things. There are really tons of options. Like I mentioned, there's game currency. You could prompt people for extra lives. Maybe you just Candy Crush, I think, does this, where you play for 3 lives and you run out of lives and you can pay 99 cents for an extra one, or something like that. Extra photo filters. This is pretty popular as well. There are photo editing apps that give you a couple filters for free, and then you can purchase more. Special effects. TikTok is really big right now, and there have been a lot of video editing apps that do the same thing as the photo apps, but instead of filters, they offer special effects. You could also allow people to remove ads. That's pretty common. And there's really not a limit to what you do with your in-app purchases, as long as it makes sense. I do have a caveat that you probably want to make sure your application is still usable, even if the user doesn't make any purchases. If someone downloads a game that's free and then they are immediately gated with a paywall, they're probably not going to try it out. Same with the photo filtering app. If you download a free app and it's like, well, you have to pay for all these filters, no one's going to actually try it and realize, hey, maybe I should buy a couple of these other filters. So your in-app purchase technology is actually really light. So on mobile, you have to use Apple or Google Play to facilitate purchases inside of your app. You'll see some really weird oddities. Maybe if you use the Amazon app on an iPhone, where you can't purchase digital goods through the Amazon app because they don't want to run their processing, like their payment processing, through Apple. So you can't buy Kindle books on Amazon for iOS, for example. There's some interesting legalities behind that and why they ended up doing that. But generally speaking, you'd need to run your in-app purchases for digital goods through Apple and Google Play. The exception is maybe you aren't building a mobile app. Maybe you're building a web app or a desktop app or something else. Stripe, the company I mentioned earlier, has that does subscription services, also does just flat fee transactions as well. I have a random tip that is extremely relevant. Don't store credit cards. So you might be wondering, why in the world do I have to use all these platform as a services where I could just create a service that takes in people's credit card information, and then every night I pull up their credit cards and run those transactions through some other tool like Square or something like that. Yeah, there are a lot of reasons, but I'm sure you've heard several stories about credit card information being leaked through companies that have data breaches and similar things. Credit cards are probably one of the worst things that you could leak, or debit cards or whatever it is. Debit cards are even worse, actually. But yeah, so don't store that information. So that poses an interesting question of like, well, how do I actually run that transaction if I'm not storing that information? So let's say you have an application that does something like this. You have an app that sits on a server somewhere. users can access your application either via a mobile app, a tablet app, or a desktop app, or a website. It doesn't really make a difference. They make HTTP requests to your server. Your server returns responses to those requests. That's your application. So in a conventional Stripe architecture, you have your application that's going back and forth. You load a payment screen with a Stripe form. The user fills out that form with their credit card information. And then instead of sending that data to your server, it gets sent off to Stripe. Stripe processes all of this. They manage all of that. They are way more secure than your one person application will ever be. So they take care of that user's credit card information and then run that transaction for you. And then they, this says webhook. It should be a webhook. So they actually will, as soon as that transaction processes, Stripe will send a request to your web server to let you know, hey, user brad.cypert@gmail.com just completed this transaction and paid this amount of money. And then your server would say, oh, okay, let me go ahead and update that. And then it would send data to the user to let them know that they successfully purchased the item that they were trying to purchase. I say conventional because there's also fairly recently a newer process called Stripe Checkout. I see this a lot in e-commerce, but I'm also starting to see it more and more in non-e-commerce applications. So kind of the same model. Users access your server via their device. They indicate their intent to pay by filling out a Stripe payment form. So instead of actually filling out the form, they're clicking a button to express their intent to pay. So maybe like a buy now button. They then end up loading data from Stripe server. So it takes them to like a new web page. It looks like this. It's a little blurry, unfortunately, but it shows the item, the price, and then has this pay with card. So they pay, and then as soon as they pay, the exact same thing happens where Stripe sends a request to your app, and then you can say, hey, thank you, you successfully paid for this product, here you go. Or we'll ship it to you, or whatever you need to do. This is kind of neat because this, if you've ever written like credit card validation, there's an algorithm called Loon's algorithm for credit card validation. It's not super complicated, but when you think about, okay, I need this form field, I also need to validate credit cards. I also need to validate the CCV, and if it's a Visa card, it's only 3 digits, and if it's a Discover card, it can be 3 digits, and if it's an Amex card, it can be up to 4 digits. All of that stuff, it really becomes kind of a burden. So Stripe Checkout lets you not have to worry about any of that stuff, and you can just send users to a Stripe form where they can fill it out, where Stripe manages all of this, and they've done a great job building it. So you get a quality checkout experience. So what does this look like? I couldn't have a developer presentation without some code, and I know it's really light, but so assuming you have a web server, which is just an application, if you're not familiar, an application that handles incoming HTTP requests or HTTPS requests, and then does something with them and then returns a response to the person that requested it. So this one's written in Node. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, hopefully nothing is too crazy. You can see that this is using Stripe. So you would require Stripe, and you would pass in a key that would be generated as part of you signing up for Stripe. Express is a framework that helps you set up web servers specifically. So you can see that we call that Express. We set up a static directory, which isn't super relevant. You have your domain, and then we say, hey, Express, whenever a user makes a post request to create checkout session, do this stuff. And this stuff is telling Stripe to create a new checkout session. This will generate an ID. You can see down here the session.id. And then it returns that to the user. So that's all fine and dandy, but how does that actually work for our user? So in the browser, you would have something like this. This is pretty big. We'll zoom in on it in just a second. You can see that we're including polyfill for fetch. You might not need that depending on the browsers you support, but you do need js.stripe.com/v3. And then you can see there's a little bit of markup here that just describes the item that people are buying, stubborn attachments from the looks of it, and a checkout button. So the actual interesting bit is this JavaScript. I'm going to flip screens. It's the same JavaScript here. It's just zoomed in so you can actually see it. What's really interesting here is we're using another key. This is your public key. So the one that we had in the server right back here is your secret key. SK is secret. Don't tell anyone. Public key is public. This one can be in your JavaScript on the front end. So you have your public key, and then we are finding that checkout button by ID, and then we're adding an event listener. So whenever someone clicks on that checkout button, we make a post request to create checkout session. What is that again? This right here. So this code will run when we make that request. And then we get the response. And remember how I said we'd have a session ID? You can see here that we call Stripe redirect to checkout, and we pass that session ID. There's a chance that it fails, and they talk about handling. They talk about handling that here. I tried to highlight the text in an image. But it could fail due to a lot of different things. Security constraints in the browser, maybe a network error, maybe they don't have access to Stripe. So all sorts of different things could happen. And you probably should handle that for a good user experience as well. So how do we handle let's go back really quick. This part right here, where Stripe sends a webhook to your application. So we send the user to checkout, they fill out that form, and then what happens? Well, Stripe says, okay, hey, they successfully filled out that form. So we can add a new route called webhook. You can call it whatever you want. Stripe will let you put in the URL for your webhook here. And then you can see that we can use a body parser to parse the actual JSON that's coming in from the payload. We have a request and response, which is part of Express. And then you do something with that payload. It's not actually doing it here because this is really up to your business logic or your application. If maybe the user buys an e-commerce item, you would maybe create a shipping order for that e-commerce item or something like that. If the user buys digital content, like maybe an ebook or something, you would give them like a link to download that content or whatever needs to be done. You would update their user so that they have access to a course that they just purchased or something similar. It's really up to your application, but this is how you would kind of start with that. So webhook request.body, and then look at the payload to actually figure out what you should do. And that payload's really, really big. So it's a very large object that describes exactly what happened. So it would be like the user, and then it also has like a Stripe user ID associated with it, which will be unique. The email address, probably, I think the last four of the credit card gets sent over as well. Just information about what they purchased, all of that gets sent to this webhook. So that's where you would take care of that. So I've mentioned Luna Journal a bunch. I actually really am excited to talk about this in particular because it's a little different than what I just showed. So I mentioned Luna Journal's a mobile app first and a web app second. So I'm still working on part of the web app and still working on the mobile app and making it great. But I've monetized Luna Journal as well, and it's small but successful. So how did I go about doing that with Luna Journal? First, this is probably a little less development and a little more business. And sorry if that's not super interesting, but I do think it's really important. So there's 4 steps, and the first step is ideation, and this is actually solving a problem and like having the idea of something that you want to build that you think you could monetize. I can't stress this enough. Ideation is probably the most important piece of all of this. If you don't have a good idea, no one's going to pay for it. And I honestly think that your best ideas are probably ones that you don't think about how people are going to pay for first. So I mentioned here, solve a problem. This is the best idea is solve problems. It needs to be worth solving. If it costs, a good example is $20,000 a month to have toilet paper delivered to your house, you're probably not going to have anyone buy that. That's not worth solving because it's just too expensive to solve for how little benefit you get. And then I mentioned here something someone would have paid to have solved for them is extra nice, but we can always come back to monetizing it after we've built it. And then, like I said, the step's critical. No matter how great your code or design is, if it doesn't actually do anything, no one's going to pay for it. So Luna Journal's ideation. Sorry if this is a little uncomfortable of a topic, but my dog has epilepsy, and sharing seizure information with my fiance and vet was way too difficult. We tried to maintain a logbook, like a physical logbook. It just really didn't work. We tried to maintain making sure that she got her medication, all 4 pills in the morning and all 4 pills in the evening. Sorry, 5 pills in the evening now. And it's just hard to track all of that information. And then on top of it, if you've know anyone who has a dog with epilepsy or really any recurrent medical needs, you'll probably know that your vet wants to know everything. And that makes sense. They're trying to do what's best for the animal, but it was really rough to keep track of all this information, work on it together with my fiance, and then make sure that our vet was able to get that information as well. So after ideation, the next step would be market research. Who would pay for this problem to be solved? How many people are there with this problem? Are there any tools out there that help with this problem currently? And then if so, what do people pay to solve this problem currently if they can? And then this one's a little more vague, but what are the lifestyles that people with this problem tend to lead? That's an interesting one because people in general tend to do things that fit into their lifestyle. So your product could change drastically based off the lifestyle that those people tend to lead. A really good example, I think I talk about it here. If not, we can run back to that slide in just a second. Yeah, okay. So a really good example is the lifestyles for people who have pets with medical needs or recurrent medical needs are really vague. Like I can't pinpoint that. It could be millionaires who have pets that they really love and there's just no solution for their medical needs, or it could be people like me that are somewhere middle class that have pets, and it's hard to deal with like the finances and things like that come with buying prescription medication for her all the time, vet appointments, things like that too. Or it could be people who have even less money than I do. So this is an interesting one because if I'm trying to think about how I want to monetize this, I need to make sure it's accessible to everyone. So Luna Journal's market research was pretty interesting. One of the first things I did before I even had the idea for Luna Journal was I joined this canine seizure support group on Facebook. It's about 5.6K people as of 3 or 4 days ago. And then part of what gave me the idea was 1 or 2 times per week, I'd see the question posted in that group of what app are you using to track your pet seizures? And a couple people had a couple apps that they liked. I tried all of them, and I didn't find any that really fit our needs. There was one, the best one I found was really great if you were just one person wanting to track your pet seizures. But I wanted some way that me and my fiance could both use the same app and we could work on that together, kind of like collaborating on a document in Google Drive. So additionally, I mentioned this a little bit on the last slide, but seizures are expensive. Pet owners don't have a lot of money to spend on an app to help track seizures. One of the rules of that group is no selling anything, and their logic behind it was we are all paying a lot of money to help deal with our pets' medical needs, and we don't need someone to try and sell us on something else. And then I found several tools that help you log data, but very few that actually help you share it with your veterinarian. So I kind of took all this information and said, okay, there's a better user experience for an app to track your pet seizures. I don't want to charge people a lot of money for it if I were to build something. And then also, there's not any tools to help me with one part of my problem, which is sharing that data with my veterinarian. So how do I do that? And would people find that valuable? The next step that I would recommend is building a product without monetization. Whether this is actually like a software product or a blog or whatever it is, I would still start this way. And it's having an idea how to monetize your product, app, or tool, but don't build monetization first. Focus on solving the problem, get a few people using it, and get their feedback. Once they've used it, ask if they'd be willing to pay for it. And if so, how much? This is a really tricky question, and it really depends on who you ask. If you ask your mom, she's going to say she'd pay $1 million for it because your mom's supportive. If you ask your friends, it really depends on your friends. Some of them would be like, yeah, I'd pay for that. But if they actually got into a situation where they'd have to, fork over a monthly fee to actually use it, they would never do it. I actually find that getting feedback from strangers is really awkward, and it feels so weird at first. But as soon as you kind of break the ice and ask them for feedback, it's really candid. A lot of them, I think, have quickly realized, hey, I'll never see this person again, so I can be honest with them, and maybe it would help out. Plus, if you're personable, maybe it's easy to get people to give you an honest opinion. Lastly, good coding techniques like architectural planning, design patterns, things of that nature make it so easy to add monetization later that you just don't need to worry about it at this step. Solve a problem, solve your own problem, and then worry about monetization later. So with Luna Journal, I built the app on Firebase's free tier. Firebase is a software as a service that has a free tier that does development tools. So like a database in the cloud, um, remote configuration in the cloud, other things like that, user management. So it's tools for developers. Excuse me. I added support for all the core features that I wanted. I needed to be able to log medical entries. I needed to be able to take photos. I needed to be able to send those entries to my veterinarian relatively easily. I needed to be able to track her medications. I needed to make sure that not only did we have all of her medications in the app, but I needed to make sure that she was getting them daily. So we built all of those features into the app first, and then I pushed Luna Journal out to friends and family, which was actually really interesting. The feedback I got was a lot of people being like, I don't really use it, man. I downloaded it, but I don't need an app like this." And it was actually really discouraging. So maybe my lesson that I learned and the takeaway there is, if you're sending your app out to friends and family, take it with a grain of salt because a lot of them may not be the target audience for the product you're building. And then get feedback and implement improvements. One of the very first things that the very first paying customer I had emailed me like probably 30 minutes within subscribing. And I totally thought she was going to ask for a refund. And instead, she didn't. She asked for, she said, "Hey, this is really great, but my dog has trouble eating and we track his weight regularly. I don't really have a good way to track weight in the app." So I talked to her about it and I said, "Well, you could technically use entries." And she goes, "Yeah, but we use entries for other things and we don't want to clutter up that space." And I was like, "Okay, that makes sense. I get that." And we talked a little bit just via email about what features she would expect in weight management uh, features for that application. And then the very next feature I built was weight management. So she could log weight and have a graph to view trends over time and things like that. All right. The last step is bolting on a monetization strategy. I like the idea of bolting it on because it makes me feel like I'm like taking a drill and just adding it onto the existing application. And I do think that's probably the best way to build almost any software solution. The only caveat would be unless you're building something like Etsy, where payments are just like essential to the application. But bolting it on, ads are the easiest. Like I said, it's usually just a script or an SDK that you plug in, and you can choose where those ads render. Google actually has this thing called auto ads now, where it scans your page and plops ads in the page where it thinks are the best spots for you. So you don't even have to choose where ads are anymore. It's pretty crazy. You can use paywalls to gate off paid features. This is actually something I've toyed around with a little bit too. As I'm building out new features, I have a like a little toggle in the settings that you can toggle to be a lab rat, which gives you access to new features in Luna Journal before anyone else. But some of them are also paywalled as part of the subscription. You can offer a free trial for subscriptions. It's really easy to do this on mobile in particular because both iOS and Android allow you to manage it from the Play Store, or sorry, the App Store or Play Store. But you can also do it in Stripe as well, or you could hand roll your own implementation of a free trial. I signed up for an app a while back that uses AI to help generate text, and I was able to generate 3 blocks of text before I had to pay for it. And it just gives you an idea of like, is this something that is actually going to work or solve my needs? And if so, then yeah, I'm happy to fork over money if I have it to give me more time or solve some of my problems. And then also incentivize existing users to upgrade. This is something I would highly recommend doing if you take this approach. Is just reminding them that there is a paid version via like a banner, and occasionally giving them like you can use iconography to symbolize that, hey, this is a paid, this feature is paid and you have to pay to upgrade to use it. Um, that, if done poorly, can actually be really annoying, but if done well, it's and people like your application, I don't see any issue with that. If I were to click on something that pops up and says, "Hey, this is paid," and especially if you explain why it's paid. For example, photo storage in Luna Journal is paid because we store your photos in the cloud, and I have to pay for that. So when you try to store photos, if you're not a paid subscriber for Luna Journal, you will be prompted to upgrade. And then I guess, like I just mentioned, some of Luna Journal's monetization strategy is subscription for cloud storage, like storing photos in the cloud. And then also the cloud storage is essential to collaborate. So with our paid tier, you get access to a household, and you can add members to that household. In that case, it's me, my fiance, my mom, because she sometimes helps with Luna, and other people that we would need to share access to, maybe dog sitters, pet walkers, things like that. And then also the sharing the vet functionality. So pressing a button and firing off an email to your vet with the information that you just recorded. So I'm currently working on building out on-device storage for a free tier. This is almost finished. It's been a very, very long process, but I really want to help solve this problem and not require people to pay for it. Because there have been times where I've looked at the budget for my dog and just thought, holy cow, man, I need to cut expenses however I can. So I totally understand other people might be in that need, and if I can make that problem easier, that's great. And maybe one day, if they have money, they'll be like, wow, Luna Journal was really helpful. I would love to, give back a little bit. I also may investigate ads and the ability to purchase them away. I mentioned this earlier, the ability to like make an in-app purchase to remove ads. I do, like I said, I'm on Firebase's free tier right now, but there are some things that I do have to pay for. So I'm trying to figure out how to negate that cost a little bit. And then I have a quote from, a partial quote from someone from that Facebook group, and then myself. So she said that pet health is stressful enough already. And my thought is that, yeah, it is. So I should be respectful to the user. I don't want to make things more painful or financially or otherwise. I also don't want to put users in a scenario where they're trying to share information with their vet in person via the app, and ads just keep popping up and getting in the way. Like that's it's embarrassing to be in that situation. As someone who has been in that situation, it is embarrassing to be there. So trying to be respectful. One last tip. This is probably the most relevant thing. If you have not seen this algorithm before, it's super complex. So I wouldn't don't worry if you don't get it. Profit is revenue minus expenses minus your operating costs. So we talked a lot about generating revenue, and without a doubt, generating profit is beyond the scope of this talk. But just something to keep in mind: if you do actually want to make a profit off of your software, you need to generate more revenue than your expenses and your operating costs. Maybe some things to think about. Expenses would be if you pay for like a logo, like you pay a designer to design a logo. Maybe your operating cost would be the servers through Firebase that you pay for cloud storage or something like that. If you want to make a profit, there's no way around it. You need to do this. Any questions? iPhone XR, do you have any questions? I'm really hoping to hear from you.
It was a great presentation. Thank you. It was very thorough and clear, inspiring.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad I'm able to help. So another rule from that Facebook group is don't push products on people. Don't sell things. So I can't actually market it through that group. I tried once, and then they sent me the rules, and I was like, oh yeah, oh my bad, I won't do that again. So I have tried marketing through ads as well. There are also, in addition to running Google ads or similar, you can run ads through, or like it's kind of like a sponsored listing through the App Store. So when people search for like pet medical app, I can pay for those keywords. So Luna Journal is one of the first things that come up. I'm still pretty early in building it, so I have not been heavily advertising it at the moment. Most of the users that we have been from word of mouth or friend to friends. I'm actually shocked at how many people I was able to tell and mutual friends of them had pets with special needs or medical needs and saw a lot of benefit from it. So the initial app, let's see, I started building it probably in April of last year. That sounds about right. And then we had an initial release in about August. And that was part-time work, working a little bit on nights and weekends, about 5 months to get something out. When doing market research, if you found someone doing a similar project already, would you consider approaching a competitor about improving an existing product or continue on your own? I like the idea of continuing on my own because a lot of times I really just like building things. And then also, I think that if you build your own implementation, you will have the best possible product to solve your specific use case. Are you working on creating any other apps? Yes. So I have an AI writing assistant that actually I'm probably going to shut down soon. It never really caught on, and I didn't do market research. I just kind of built it, and I think I built a tool that no one really wants. So it was really fun to build, but like if no one wants it, I don't really know what the point of it is. So I will probably it's bluejay.app.app. It's a writing assistant tool that uses natural language, like NLP, natural language processing, and a little bit of really light artificial intelligence to help you write better, ideally. So I have that, and then honestly, a lot of what I've been working on outside of this has been open source code, so libraries, things like that. Not a lot of other apps at the moment. This is if you want the slides, they're available here. If you're not familiar, this is a great site for slides. This is all of my other presentations that are on Speaker Deck. And then this is the slide that we just talked about.